Well, if you'll pardon me, I won't share any of my griefs with you. But I've never had one, or known anyone who had one, who's had the faintest consolation from religion. And indeed, being told, as the Christians tell them, that they're off to a better place and so on, I think is positively wicked thing to do. I think lying to the dying for a living, what self-respecting person can do that?
And you know it's a lie because, tell me how you know it's a lie, since you assert it again and again.
Because the person saying it cannot possibly know it to be true.
And therefore it's a lie.
They don't have access to information.
Even if they believe it, it's a lie.
Yes, it's a lie. Well, it offers the chance of living without illusion, which I think, it says that philosophy and literature will do a great deal more for you. There's a lot more morality in them. There's a lot more ethical discussion in Dostoevsky, say.
It may be true, but who will present them in our society, in a real society? Who will present them in a way to create structure?
For now, I'm presenting.
There he is.
For now, I'm presenting. I can't do...
You're going to be very busy.
I can only appear in my own person here. I can even say that to some extent it works for me. This irony, I think, is tremendously useful, as is philosophy, especially the philosophy of Spinoza, especially in times of anguish. And the realization that there's no false consolation can actually cheer you up. But once you face the fact that you're born into a losing struggle, things immediately appear a great deal more manageable in some ways. And really, of the remarks against this made, not one of these remarks couldn't have been made by a devout member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what I want to ask him is this: if anything of what he says is true, is he really saying that he would prefer me not to be myself, not to be an unbeliever, and someone who believes in irony and the unillusioned world, but I'd be morally better off if I was a Wahhabi Muslim, for example,
is me
or a Roman Catholic?
Is he me?
Are you asking
this? Okay.
I mean, according to you, I would be a better person.
No, don't answer the question. You asked me the question. Right. You're not allowed to answer it for me.
You imply.
I imply.
I want to know if you really mean that. Well, violence, there's no mystery about violence. I mean, violence arises because we are primates, imperfectly evolved. Our prefrontal lobes are too small, our adrenaline glands are too big. There are various other deformities of this kind. Sexual organs designed by a committee, all the rest of it. And we're greedy, and
we're back to polytheism.
We're greedy and fearful, and covetous of other people's and also, surprisingly, it's probably our biggest defect, given that the reason we're so successful is there's almost no genetic difference between us. If we were dogs, we'd all be the same. Breed, there's fantastically little variation. But we're incredibly prone to tribalism and ethnic and racial, what Freud calls the narcissism of small differences. So, of course, if a tribe, let's say, that's calling itself the Children of Israel, for the sake of argument, decides that it should kill all the other tribes that get in its way, take their women as slaves, butcher their men, take their land, take their cattle, and so battle in this way across to Canaan and take everyone else's land and burn down their... That's going to happen whether there's a God or not, or whether there's religion or not, but it'll happen very much more intensely if they believe they have a mandate from heaven to do so. It's a terrific force multiplier. I think there would have been a quarrel between the Hutu and the Tutsi of Rwanda, say, once Belgian colonialism had established that there were these two different character groups, types, that is, the tribes. But it's a terrific force multiplier that the Catholic Church was as strong as it was in Rwanda, the most Christian country in Africa, made it infinitely worse. What makes the Israel-Palestine two-state solution ungettable? Because there's a chunk of people on both sides who say they have God in their corner and God gave only their group the land. And they can negate the votes of everybody else, including the whole of the international community, by the way, just because of their faith. Northern Ireland is the same. There would have been a Republican nationalist dispute. It's infinitely worse because of religion. So I think the corollary I'd like to hold would be that the less religion there was, the less violence there would be. But I can't in good Darwinian conscience say that. But I think the more that people refused orders that were divine, as, for example, to take the preposterous allegation that the rabbi makes that the wars of the 20th century were secular wars, the belt buckle worn by every soldier in the Nazi army that says, Gott mit uns, God on our side. I don't think that was a help to you. Things were bad enough as they were. On page 70, I think it is, of Mein Kampf, Hitler says that in taking on the filthy virus of Judaism, I know I'm doing the work of the Lord, and I'm summoned by the Lord to do this work. A book, one of the very few books the Vatican didn't ban in that period, by the way. I don't think that was a help either. So I'd say, on the whole, we'd be better off without the belief either in a supreme dictator, because that leads to violence, or the idea that God takes sides in our pathetic mammalian disputes. I'm sorry.
Comrades, what kind of orders you take?
Brothers and sisters.
That's better.
Comrades, friends. I suppose it is somewhat to the credit of some Christians that in the waning decades of thousands of years of slavery that were biblically mandated, some of them belatedly joined things like the American Anti-Slavery Society, stars of which were Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, non-believers, right? Whereas to the last day of the Confederacy, the flag of the Confederacy said Deo Vindice, God on our side. And every justification for that slavery came from the Bible, where indeed it's not hard to find it. David says is that a person exists who would say, now that I don't believe in God, I'll stop giving money to charity. I don't care anymore. I don't think there is such a person. And if that were so, it would be a very strange religion that they'd been professing.
Who will organize good works in the absence of religion?
But why is it that in survey after survey, religious people do give more, and religious people watch less television and use drugs less and use alcohol less?
This is what religion is down to.
It has social utility.
It's very impressive to me.
Okay, good.
It's very often the first thing. When we debate with Catholics, they always change the subject to charity right away. With Jews, it's usually a little later.
You just said that they...
And with Muslims... And with Muslims, it's
at the
all the time. Because what else can they don't want to defend their faith.
But you just said the opposite. You just said that if you didn't believe, you wouldn't do it.
They don't want to defend their faith. They don't want to say, they feel uneasy talking about redemption, salvation, all this kind of thing. But look at the good work we've done. If you talk to the Mormons, they'll say, you may not think much of Joseph Smith. And I say, you got that right. But, boy, you should see our missionaries in Peru.
The government will do the work if religion does not.
Excuse me,
government?
What has this got to do with the existence of God or the validity of religious claims? It has nothing to do with it.
Social
which
utility.
is why it's always introduced as a time-wasting tactic. I have not conceded that it's to a greater extent. Let me give you an example. With the great Brazilian photographer, Sebastião Salgado, whose wonderful work on the primary producers of the third world, you ought to be familiar. One of the great photographers. He's the ambassador, as the UNICEF calls it, the United Nations Children's Fund, for the eradication of polio. I went with him all over Bengal. We got it down to the point where, except for a few bits of Afghanistan and El Salvador, polio was almost gone from the world. It could go with smallpox. Not a small thing. Done by UNICEF, a secular organization. And we nearly got, a date was announced, but we were pretty sure polio would be gone. And it spread back, because largely Muslim groups in Nigeria, and also in parts of Bengal and Afghanistan, told people, don't go get your children inoculated. It's a plot by scientists and Jews and others to sterilize Muslims. And that plus the Hajj, that plus the wonderful devotional habit of going to Mecca all the time and taking all your diseases with you, has meant that polio is back all the way across Africa now. So I'm not going to have it said that in order to do good, you've got to be more religious than someone who...
Do you assume that everything will one day be solved scientifically, or does it matter to you?
No, all the science is going to do is keep on teaching us how little we know, and multiplying the distance between our own attainments and our desire to master these matters. Many of these questions will remain undecidable, which is the way I like them. Religion and science can coexist in the same person, that's true. Now, I know Francis Collins. He's brilliant on the genome, but if you've read C.S. Lewis, you don't need to read him on religion. It's unbelievably naive. Sir Isaac Newton was an alchemist, a very strong, if rather superstitious Christian. He thought the Pope was the Antichrist, might have been onto something there. But very weird, full of very weird beliefs. I thought if you knew the measurements of the old temple, you'd know more than if you understood gravity. Alfred Russel Wallace, who did most of Darwin's work for him, was a spiritualist, would go to table rapping sessions, listening to burblings from the beyond. Joseph Priestley was a Unitarian and believed in the phlogiston theory.
Couldn't that be a
late? It's really only until, I would say it's only until Albert Einstein, not until, Albert Einstein, that you get a scientist who's also essentially a philosopher of pure mind. That's the great breakthrough. And now you can have private beliefs and be a scientific person, but no one says my science helps to vindicate my religion. No one says that anymore. That's not doable.
Generally speaking, can you be a good Jew and not follow the 613 if that is the prescription for universal morality?
Well, the most commonly taken universal, absolute moral statement is what's sometimes called the Golden Rule, which, well, Rabbi Hillel says don't do to another person what would be repulsive to you. Others say do as you would be done by, just putting it the other way. It's in the Analects of Confucius. Very few societies don't have it. So I think that's what we'd have to take as the nearest to an absolute. It's obviously subject to various relativities, alas. For one thing, it's only really as good as the person saying it. Should I not do to Charles Manson what I don't want him to do to me? Well, if you see what I mean. I mean, should we say, let's do to Charles Manson what we wouldn't want done to ourselves? Obviously not. It's just like the contradiction between the Old and the New Testaments. The Old Testament says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which would lead to a very eyeless and toothless world. And then the Nazarene says, you can't condemn anyone unless you can cast the first stone. Actually, that bit was knitted into the Bible quite late and is almost certainly a fabrication. But it's believed in by many Christians who, as you know, will believe practically anything. But if you can't condemn anyone without being yourself without sin, then we can't even arrest Charles Manson unless we were sinless ourselves. So these moral absolutes are actually more full of moral relativism than you might think. And the reason people want there to be absolutes is this: they want there to be an absolute authority who can give them to you. Because wouldn't that save you all the trouble of thinking out ethics for yourself? Which is where I started. Why not take that chance? More enjoyable, less subject to appalling commandments to stone witches and murder homosexuals.
Very good, and all the rest.
Well, I'd commend to you someone who's much more expert on this subject. I started by mentioning Lawrence Krauss's lecture on A Whole Universe from Nothing. But where's the grandeur, where's the divinity in the hiccup? And who produces the hiccupper? All you get from this is an infinite regression. Who creates this creator? It gets you nowhere. And again, if you do make the assumption, which I can't dispute or certainly cannot refute, that there is a first cause or an uncaused cause, it still doesn't mean that there's a God who takes sides, answers prayers, enjoins moral.
I didn't ask about that.
No.
Right.
So I'm afraid you compel me to somewhat to repeat myself.
Can I just ask a quick question about what you just said? If it's an assumption that you can't refute, which I understand, I think everybody here would say you can't prove that there's not a God, but that doesn't mean that there is one. But if it's an assumption that you can't refute, why is it that when someone says, I believe that it is true, do you say they're lying?
I didn't say that they're lying.
You said to me, when someone stands
when you lie, someone who goes to tell a child that if they don't behave well, they'll go to hell.
That wasn't the example that we used.
Someone who goes to the deathblet and
says that I believe that there's a world other than this one.
You're going to a better place is I think, a charlatan, a nauseating charlatan.
I'll let